I like to draw and I like to paint. In college, I drew daily comic strips for several newspapers, and I dabble in watercolor. Now, some people say I'm creative, and technically, or at least grammatically, that's true. Creating images is being creative. But I would argue that that's a safe form of creativity. To me, true creativity is more. True creativity requires a constraint, an obstacle, a limitation. Nothing stifles creativity more than being told, draw anything you want. That's when I just literally draw a blank. I think true creativity is finding an elegant solution to a problem, finding a way around an obstacle. And so I would argue that the spark to creativity is the obstacle or the constraint itself. Now, that limitation can be external, can also be self-imposed. Take the example of Piet Mondrian. Now, you may not recognize the name, but I bet you will recognize his paintings. Mondrian started out as a figurative painter, and he painted a lot of trees with the intricate patterns of branches, and then he gradually imposed more and more limitations on himself, trying to bring it down to, at some point, just vertical and horizontal black lines and even primary colors. And you may recognize this, his iconic images. He was a gifted artist, but his true genius was to be able to bring it down to its bare essence. Now, I'm also a surgeon, and I need to stay current with the medical literature, and that's actually not that easy to do. There are two main limitations to that: time and space. There's more information at our fingertips today than ever before, and who has the time to read everything? So how do we select out what we really need to know, and how do we tune out this background noise of useless information? Well, a lot of us are visual creatures, and so images and graphics can help a lot. They can summarize complex ideas, and of course, they grasp our attention. But that's where the other problem is. In addition to time, we also have a problem with space. And by space, I mean visual space. We've gone from desktops to laptops to tablets to phones and even to watches. And so as a result, those images have been reduced dramatically as well, and they've lost all detail. And all we're left with is just the bare essence of the concept, which is reminiscent of our friend Mondrian, but it also calls back to my first love of comics. Because there is a new trend in scientific visualization called the visual abstract. And what the visual abstract is it's a way to summarize very complex ideas or research studies down to typically 3 panels with very few words, a few pictograms, and stick figure silhouettes. Now, you can do a lot with stick figures. You can bring the head down and to the side a little, and you have somebody who's sad, depressed, despondent. You can replace the legs with a horizontal bar, and you have somebody who's relaxed, zen, happy. You can make the head proportionally larger, and you get a child. So on the one hand, this dramatic reduction of space and viewing space has eliminated all details, and pretty much we can't see the details and the subtleties. But on the other hand, it's forced us to become more creative and to find ways to express what we want to do. And the whole idea is to make the audience stop and even worry, didn't think you could do that. So let me give you an example. There's a recent study that looked at the role of the pediatrician when there is a disagreement between the child and the parent. So how should the pediatrician act if there is intergenerational conflict? Intuitively, you would think, well, you want to side with the parent. That is the parental authority. You don't want to undermine that. And you could also argue that the child may lack maturity to make important decisions. But you could also argue that the child needs an advocate, needs a voice. The study concludes that, in fact, if you can choose that, or if you can choose, you should not choose sides at all, but you should be an arbiter, should be a facilitator to bring the two parties together in conflict resolution. So how could we express intergenerational conflict? How could we express this in a simple pictogram? Well, first we can have the child turn away and even pout. We can have the parent look angry as well. But if we bring them back to back, now we truly have, in one image, intergenerational conflict. So how does that fit into our visual abstract? Well, here are the two the primary ideas about student side. So on one hand, you have the pediatrician pointing to the parent and siding with the parent. On the other one, you have the advocate model where the pediatrician points to the child. But as we learned, the best position is to be an arbiter. And now the hands are no longer pointing, but they're building a bridge, they're bringing the two parties together. Now, I want to point out that they're still angry, but at least they're looking at each other. I'm also an educator, and I teach a course in medical illustration to students at Brown in the Rhode Island School of Design. And one of the things that I teach is how to create visual abstracts. Now, you don't need to know a lot about medicine or science to be able to grasp the concept of visual abstract. All you need is a good narrative. And the one that I like a lot is Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's kind of perfect model because you have 3 panels, 3 bears, 3 bowls of porridge. And the students seem to like this and they become very creative, and I'm going to show you a few examples. Here's one by Amanda Molina, and she was able to summarize a very complex randomized controlled study published in the New England Journal of Medicine using just very simple pictograms. Here's one by Amanda Hogue, and she sort of one-upped me by using not 3 but 2 panels to show that in toddlers, too much screen time may lead to delayed language development. So I hope I have argued and I've convinced you that the spark to creativity is an obstacle, a constraint. Somebody telling you, you can't do that, or this is not going to work, or nobody's ever done that before, or it's illegal. Well, maybe not that one. Scratch that, not that one. But I will tell you what's really cool, when your own creative spark is able to ignite somebody else's creativity. And I want to show you one last example of another student, Iria Sojo. So she took the story of this princess who went for a walk one day and came to a pond, and there was a frog, and the frog convinced her that he was cursed. And he convinced her to kiss him, and she kissed him, and lo and behold, he turned into a beautiful prince. And she summarized all this entire narrative like this. Thank you.